At the beginning of the story, we are shown some kind of inheritance from Mr. Beast and are told that absolutely anyone can have the chance to become a rich man. The boy looked carefully at his phone while reading this inscription, but only it had a continuation. Despite the fact that anyone could become a real billionaire, in reality it was not so easy. In the next frame, we are shown a couple, and the blonde begged her boyfriend to buy her a new handbag from Louis Vuitton, of course. Since he is rich, he immediately allowed her to buy it. The saleswoman in the background bowed to wealthy clients as a sign of gratitude for coming to buy expensive clothes. Looking at all this, the main character understood that he liked the way they behaved. Each of them achieved success through hard work or talent, and someone was born with gold in a rich family and ate from a golden fork all their life. But a person who is nothing of himself could not become rich, by the way. The arrow now points to a poor loser who has no money. Looking at his balance, the boy realized that he had little money left and he still needed to pay for the rent of the apartment and the loans that he had taken out. He did not understand what to do now. For some strange reason, the boy didn't understand what he should do now because he had only 3 million V on his balance sheet. Like the true genius playboy billionaire Tony Stark, he decides to simply spend his last money on expensive clothes from Gucci while he was too happy about it. This could be called the joy of a real fool, because the main character bought himself clothes from a limited collection, and no one else will have them. He didn't regret the purchase one bit, and he could find a way to make money. Our main character was an ordinary guy who worked in a bar and spent all his earned money. His name is Eon Myung-W Hee, and he had 2 ambitious dreams. His apartment looked far from the best because bags from expensive stores were scattered everywhere, and there was a bunch of pizza boxes, just like a hideout for the Ninja Turtles. Still, he decides to immediately try on his new clothes, and looking at himself in the mirror, he thought that he was a real handsome man the world had never seen before. Suddenly he felt that he simply stank horribly. Such a smell should not come from a man, especially if he wants to become rich. It was necessary to urgently solve this problem. And that guy who smells like some kind of parasite is now going to the bar to earn more money for useless things. Suddenly he notices that the lightsaber is not activated and thinks that this is absolutely not disgusting. After all, every successful man should have a sword from Star Wars. He already imagined how, with the help of this sword, he fought with a huge crowd of opponents who were nervous from just his menacing appearance. While his enemy could not even move, the main character says that it is not surprising that they cannot move from fear because he was a real fencing master. And today the boy has a special promotion only for his rivals. They have a unique opportunity to die at his hands. Despite the fact that they still tried to fight back, the main character was too strong to fight with him. Since they can't show him a decent fight, then let them just be punching bags, but it seems that they didn't really like that idea. But at one moment, it seems that his opponents went crazy, or they simply could no longer fight, so they begged the boy to quickly send them to the next world with a lightsaber. But this procedure turns out to be far from pleasant, because the main character is not going to just let his rivals go, so he slowly struck them with a lightsaber. All this, of course, was in his dreams, and at the moment he has not yet become such a powerful warrior to fight crowds of opponents. He understood perfectly well that until he came up with a way to earn a lot of money, he would forever remain a loser. And with such a sad thought, he went to work in a bar. It was time for a break, and some guy with blonde hair went out onto the balcony where he unexpectedly met the main character. All the same, the boy tells him about his problems with money, but only the blonde thinks that everything is actually not so bad, because the main character rents an apartment in the best area of the city and can afford to buy expensive clothes. What doesn't suit him? But suddenly the main character just starts crying because his friend managed to buy himself a car and he didn't have a cool car. But suddenly he tells Yeon Myung-won about the fact that he actually made dishonest money for her. The main character does not understand what he means, but he says that in fact he just stole her from rich people. They still have a lot of money and jewelry, so they will notice the difference. From this, the main character was simply in shock, because he didn't even suspect that he was working with such a dangerous person. In fact, the blonde stole a lot of things, and after selling them, he was able to buy himself a cool car. He doesn't take any risks because these rich idiots won't notice the disappearance of several expensive ones of things. Suddenly, he decides to ask the boy. Maybe he knows some rich guys from whom they could steal money, but does our main character look like a person who communicates with rich people? Someone called the boy's name and he was terribly afraid that he needed it because his break had just begun. Suddenly, a guy with black hair says that the main character urgently needs to return because a very important person called him by name. Of course, the guy was simply in shock because he had no influential acquaintances, but he was told to go to room 104T. But still, he remembers that he had one incredibly rich acquaintance, after which he greets the man who was in the private room of their bar. But what was his surprise when before his eyes he saw a lady with black hair who said that they had not seen each other for a long time. The main character was simply shocked when he saw the lady. Her name was Hannah, and she was an old friend of the boy, but he couldn't understand what the hell she was doing here. The lady was even pleased that the guy still remembered her, and he remembered that she was the only one who paid attention to him. They sat down at the bar to have a few drinks like old friends, but it was too strange for him that he was acting as an ordinary waiter after imagining himself as a playboy. The main character clearly liked the girl. She had a very pleasant smell and she had a pleasant appearance, but it seems that he was a little lost in his thoughts and did not notice how the drink spilled over the edges of the glass. Judging by the boy's face, he was terribly sorry for spilling the drink, but she said that everything was fine and she could clean it all up herself. He also reminds us that she was the daughter of a very influential man who owned real estate. It turns out that she came to tell the main character something. At this moment, the boy clearly tensed, because knowing how influential a girl can be, this is far from good news. But before that, they decide to show us the story of how these two met. It was back in school days when Hannah had a birthday, so she invited the whole class to celebrate it in her rich house. All the guys were happy that they were at such a holiday, as if they were in some kind of Disneyland. But one guy was still missing. The main character was running around a huge house in search of a restroom, but suddenly he came across a room that was much more interesting. He found himself in a room in which there was a huge amount of jewelry, as if he was in a jewelry store. But even this amount of jewelry could not attract the guy's attention, and he still continued to look for the restroom. But still, he notices some photograph that was standing on the shelf and realizes that her whole family is depicted on it. The main character at that time was very surprised by her mother, because she was incredibly beautiful, especially for her age. Her dad looked weird, but he was still an incredibly cool guy, and her little sister was incredibly sweet. He remembers how the girl showed off her mother's jewelry, which was called a blue diamond. Its price was 1 billion. He and everyone could not take their eyes off such jewelry. At that moment, he realized that rich people would always receive attention and be in everyone's sight, and also that they had an awful lot of money. From the very moment after he saw that the girl was so rich, his dream was to become the same Elon Musk who had a lot of money. And now a girl comes to him who wants to tell him something, but he was too confused in his thoughts that he stopped hearing the girl. He suddenly comes to his senses and asks the lady to repeat what she said. Now he listens to her carefully. It turns out that while he was remembering the past, the girl made him an offer to become her personal driver. Does he agree? But she says in advance that in fact it is not she who needs a driver, but her mother. He will simply have to constantly pick her up from different places and bring her home, after which she asks if the boy has a driver's license. While he was trying to get over the shock, the boy said that he had a driver's license, but in his thoughts he understood that he had not used it for too long. In short, she decides to make him a very lucrative offer because she will pay him a salary twice as much as he receives in this bar, and, in addition, he will no longer have to work the night shift. It was indeed a very tempting offer, but the main character still could not understand why Hannah decided to choose him for this position because he does not have any special skills. Realizing that the guy began to think about the proposal, she decides to leave immediately and explains to him that if life gives him some kind of opportunity, then he simply must hold on to this opportunity. Since he was so unsure of himself, then she will find someone more suitable. The main character cannot understand why the girl decided to leave so abruptly because he never gave her an answer. But she does not understand what he is doing because nothing can be changed. If suddenly he made a mistake, then he must think about it so as not to make it again future. He even begins to think that this is some kind of damn test that his friend is offering him, so he agrees to take on this job. This was exactly the answer that Hannah wanted to hear. He definitely won't regret his choice, and she will write him the address where he needs to call. She asked him to stop by at about 8 o'clock, and her mother would be waiting for him at the indicated address. Judging by his face, he still did not understand what kind of story he had gotten himself into. In such cases, the girl wishes him good luck and leaves the main character completely alone, but in his thoughts he was already going through all the possible outcomes of events, because any person would agree to be a driver for such huge money, right? But only Hannah, she said that she would write him the address. Did she really still keep his old number? And there was another question. How did the lady find out that the main character works in this place? Suddenly he even thought about the fact that all this time the girl had been in love with him, and therefore kept the boy's number. But it was too strange, don't you think? She made him feel as if a huge change was about to happen in his life, after which the action was postponed to the next day. The main character wakes up in his bed and realizes that something has gone wrong, as if he forgot to do something. But the expression on his face did not mean that he forgot to set the alarm. On the contrary, he could not sleep the whole night and therefore got out of bed earlier. Now he looked like a real dead inside. While he was brushing his teeth, he was trying to understand why Hannah reappeared in his life for the first time in a long time. After all, 15 whole years had passed, and there had not been even one message from her. Also, her strange expression on her face and the fact that she said that they had not seen each other for a long time, all this drove the boy crazy and gave him no peace. Still, he decides to put on his best suit from Gucci because he is going to work for a very respected person. But while he was getting ready, he was thinking about the fact that the girl was just damn beautiful. But he's just a Sigma and tries to drive away these thoughts, but still he was wondering what had to be done to grow such large watermelons. Still, he drives away these thoughts because his head was already starting to hurt from them, and in the meantime he was already ready to go to work. Of course, in his arsenal there were terribly expensive shoes that he kept just for such an occasion. And finally, the main character stood in front of the gate of a simply huge house. They asked him from the cameras why he came here, but he explains that Hannah asked him to come here in order to get a job as a personal driver. He was asked to wait a little, and while waiting, he thought that this was just an excellent career development. From an ordinary bar, he got a job in a huge mansion. The boy was incredibly worried about the new job and thought that everything looked too good to be true. Still, he tried to carefully examine the territory. It was still the same house in which they lived many years ago, but in any case, over so much time, the price of such a house has increased many times. He even decided to put himself in the place of a rich guy and imagined how he would feel if he lived in such an expensive house. But still, he thought that this work would be another failure for him. When he came to celebrate her last birthday, her mother was 21 years old. He remembered very well that they had a huge argument when they were still children about whose mother would be younger. While the main character is tying his shoelaces, he thinks that he himself is now 27 years old, which means that her mother is now 48. The woman looked very beautiful when he looked at her in the photographs, but too much time had passed and the guy thought that she had failed to maintain her beauty. While he was sitting and thinking about all this, suddenly the doors opened in front of his face as if by magic. The guy had never seen such magic outside of Hogwarts, after which an incredibly beautiful girl in an orange dress comes out to him. Just don't say that it was her mother. Out of surprise, the boy even stopped tying his shoelaces, thinking that this was the most beautiful lady he had ever met in his life. The weather turns out to be too hot, and as soon as the boy touches the asphalt, suddenly his hand just starts to burn and a burn remains. The girl, without thinking for a long time, immediately approaches him and worries whether everything is okay with the young man. The main character somehow says that everything will be fine with him, but it was difficult to talk calmly in front of such a girl. She had the most beautiful eyes he had ever seen. The boy begins to wonder who this lady is and thinks that this is Hannah's older sister, but she never had sisters. There is only one option left. But it was too hard for him to believe it. The woman gets up and asks the name of our boy. He says that she named him correctly. He still couldn't believe that this could be true when suddenly she says that she is Hannah's mother. Her names are Elle and Ha Ju, and she asked him to take care of her. But after this moment, our main character completely lost the gift of speech, because from the woman's appearance one could not say that she was 48 years old, much less that she was someone's mother. It turns out that the boy accidentally said out loud that the girl was very beautiful, and she asked for forgiveness. Could he repeat what he said? She didn't hear well. Lee Ha-ju couldn't understand who the main character called beautiful, but he also wasn't going to repeat it out loud. At one point, he just wanted to fall underground because the tension became too strong, but he couldn't do that because now he's the girl's personal driver. The main character tells us that for a long time he built his personality so that it could not be broken. But at the mere sight of such a beautiful woman, he was speechless. But still, he understood perfectly well that if he didn't get his nerves in order right now, he would never be able to go on a date with someone like her, so it would be better to calm down and just do his job. Suddenly he remembers his terrible childhood and how he was very worried about the fact that they lived in a terrible apartment. But his mother said that a child should not worry about such things. These were the problems of adults. At that time, the boy was only 11 years old. But it was then that he vowed to himself that he would be able to earn a lot of money when he grew up. After which the actions moved to some lady whose name was Kim. She was the owner of the very bar in which the boy worked, but she was not going to hire him initially. She simply couldn't believe that a guy like him came to her to work as a waiter and just laughed at his problems. The boy didn't understand why she decided to give him the position of a waiter, but she said, what was he counting on? Was he really going to get a high position without having the appropriate skills? But the guy makes a very serious face and declares that he came here to earn a lot of money. Guys who are much dumber than him are now hanging out with girls, and she offers him the position of a waiter in all seriousness. The blonde wanted to say that if he doesn't like it, he can just leave, when suddenly he interrupts her and says that he will take on this job. At that time, he was only 20 years old, and therefore he was not particularly worried about what position he would receive money in because he had no other choice. But the promotion that he had been dreaming about all this time seemed to have happened right now because in front of him stood an incredibly expensive car that some Mr. Beast could afford. There is only one moment in life when you need to make a decision, and then you just need to follow your path. The guy was shocked and still decided to clarify whether this was the car he was going to drive. The lady confirmed this with a smile. According to his rough estimates, this car cost about $400 million. He said that if our main character completely stopped eating and sold his apartment, he would be able to save up for a car in a few years. He never thought that he would need his driver's license, but now he was simply incredibly happy because his first car would be this car, which cost more than his entire fortune. But the lady thought it was strange that the main character behaved like that and thought that he didn't like the car. And then he realized that they might have other cars much more expensive than this one. In her garage, there was a Bentley, a couple of high-end Mercedes, and of course, she had a Ferrari. The main character understands that it was not in vain that he asked her about cars, but he still decides to ask if she has a truly normal car. In order not to waste extra time, he says that this machine is quite suitable for his work. In fact, he realized that they would spend the whole day counting all the brands of machines that she has. But at one point, he began to wonder what he should do now, because he received his driver's license a long time ago and completely forgot how to drive a car. And he never even dreamed of driving such an expensive car. He even imagined how, through his fault, they accidentally get into an accident. And after that, the boy will sit at Mrs. L's funeral and mourn her. Suddenly, the woman notices the strange behavior of the main character and asks the appropriate question. After all, he really knows how to drive a car. Realizing that he does not want to lose his new job, he tells the girl not to worry because he has experience in driving cars, so he can guarantee the safety of her life. Like a real gallant man, he opens the door for the girl and asks her to make herself comfortable. But she says that she will ride in the front seat because she gets carsick when she sits in the back, and she is also able to open the door for herself so that the main character does not need to do this. The main character does not understand this behavior at all, because girls like it when they are looked after which they both got into the car, and he thought that he was in a job where he understood absolutely nothing. The boy was thinking about how he could get out of this situation, but Mrs. L didn't understand why they still hadn't gone. After these words, the guy began to get even more nervous than before. It turns out that all this time some lady with blue hair was watching them, and she thought that the main character looked too much like Yeonseo. She carefully examines the photo and thinks that he really looks like the guy who just became their personal driver. While she was thinking about his future and who he has become now, we are shown how this damn Ghost Rider rushes along the track at great speed. Looking at his happy face, you can still understand that the main character was able to figure out the controls. It was no different from an ordinary car. And now he considered himself a real man who did not have to deal with any difficulties. But be that as it may, our boy simply could not concentrate on driving because the most beautiful girl he had ever met was sitting next to him, and it was hard for our hero to believe that she was really 48 years old. No matter how hard he tried, he still couldn't stop looking at her face. This was exactly one of the reasons why he still decided to stay at this job. Suddenly, he notices that on the rearview mirror, there was a keychain on which there was a portrait of a girl and some other old man. He decided to ask her if maybe it was her husband after all. Still, he found it very funny because the woman looked too young and he looked like an old man, so it looked more like it was a photo of a father and daughter. But suddenly, she still reports that it is her husband, which puts the main character into a state of shock. He even stopped looking at the road. Seemed to her that the boy was a little surprised, but meanwhile, he simply could not stop coughing, as if his usual understanding of the world had just been turned upside down. But the boy still tells her that it seems to him that her husband looks too old for her. But it seems that the lady was not at all embarrassed that her husband looked like an old raisin. Still, the boy tells her that initially he thought that it was her father or grandfather in the photo, but she doesn't say anything in response. Suddenly, the main character realizes that what he said was just terrible stupidity, and now he was trying to figure out how to get rid of this situation. He tried to explain to her that he simply expressed his thoughts incorrectly, but the girl simply laughed at it in response. If the guy didn't notice, then he had said similar things before. Still, she was not angry with him, but she began to say that the boy did not know how to watch his words at all, so they must solve this problem. The main character asked her for forgiveness for what he said to her, but she said that everything was fine because the guy only confirmed the fact that the girl was very beautiful at 48 years old. While she continued to reassure him, the boy saw her smiling and thought that this was the most beautiful smile he had ever seen in his life. He continued to think that this was the most beautiful girl he had ever met in his life, and looking at the portrait of her and her husband, he thought that he would have to become a rival for this old man. He simply could not imagine that such a young and beautiful girl like her could be married to such an old man like him. Moreover, they were a happy married couple who had children, and the main character made the assumption that the lady was simply incredible at playing cards. He even decided for a second to imagine what would happen if he became her husband, and he thought that then his life would become much happier than before. The main character was a real fan of playing cards, and she was a professional poker player, so they would have made a great married couple. While the main character was in the world of his dreams, the girl noticed that he was behaving strangely and was not paying attention to the road at all. It turns out that the girl was not indifferent to the boy either, and while he was thinking about what would happen if he were her husband, she was already thinking about how to quickly play poker with him. Still, he was in the world of dreams for too long and didn't even notice that he almost crashed into another car. Fortunately, he managed to press the brakes in time. The lady in a red dress asked him to watch the road more carefully. But the situation did not get any better because many cars from different directions were approaching in their direction, and he thought that now both of them would definitely go to the next world. But he knew from the very beginning that this would all end. Realizing that the situation had become simply terrible, the main character decided that the girl's life was too valuable, so he tried to save her. After which both cars fly into the air at great speed, and it seemed that no one had the opportunity to survive. After which we are shown a girl with blue hair who runs to meet her sister. She knocked on her door for a long time and couldn't understand why the hell she locked the door again. She loved her sister very much and wanted to tell her something. It was very important. Despite the fact that no one answered her, she still continued to knock on the door, saying that she loved her sister very much. She again asked her sister to open the door for her because she needed to tell her very important news. Suddenly the door opens and the girl with blue hair was very happy to see her. But it seems that she was not at all happy about being disturbed. The girl felt very good and asked to be allowed to rest in peace. The girl wanted to hug her sister as quickly as possible, but she was not in the mood and had already warned her that she would not be able to go to her exam. She really needed to go to the hospital with Hano, but the girl interrupts her and shows her a photo of the guy who became their new driver. Still, she thought he looked like Yeon Seo. Doesn't her sister agree with her? The little sister takes her phone back, but she couldn't understand how their father allowed this guy to work as their driver. The blonde decided to find out if this guy works in this particular house. But in response, she only said that she didn't know anything, and it would be better for her to go find out everything on her own. But the blonde didn't see anything funny in this situation. But the lady begins to behave too strangely and simply laughs at her sister, reminding her of her past. Of course, she didn't like this behavior from her younger sister and asked her to immediately shut her mouth. But the blonde's last romance was far from very successful, because at first they loved each other very much, and in the end she simply screamed at him for the guy to get out of her life. After such a scream, any guy would simply run away without thinking. While the girl with blue hair looked at her smiling, the blonde thought about how not to send her sister to the next world. The joke she said was very offensive. After which the actions are transferred to the hospital where our main character was lying. It seems that his neck was broken. Mrs. L stood next to his bed and remembered that he, like a real hero, saved her during a terrible accident, but now he himself was in simply terrible condition. But all this time she just looked at him without saying a word, but in her thoughts the girl thought that something was wrong because there were too many thoughts in her head. A lightsaber appears and the lady is surprised by this. What the hell is happening because the main character is now unconscious? Still, she dared to use the lightsaber, but she could not believe that it turned out to be real. She was simply in shock because this morning she had seen the lightsaber perfectly well, but she could not even imagine its power. It seemed that soon Mrs. L would turn to the dark side of the Force, but for now she was afraid to fight with such a powerful sword. She was told that all the tests showed that the boy would be in quite normal condition, but they could stay here to watch how his condition changed. But the lady with blue hair was wondering if this hospital had something like a human breathing simulator or some other medical supplies. It seemed that she really liked practicing medicine and learning something new, but the doctor said that he would definitely tell them the rest of the information later. But the lady with black hair makes a very serious expression on her face and asks if they have finished taking all the necessary tests. Oh yes, the doctor, of course, understands that they are very busy people, but he still asks them to wait until he finishes. But the doctor is surprised by the fact that they turn out to be a family. While the girl with blue hair played with medical things, she tried to make sure that she didn't break anything. Suddenly, the doctor still tells them that their mother had an accident this morning, and they are very surprised that they are learning about this only now. And on such a dramatic note, we end today's video. Thank you for watching. Like it, for the new part to come out as soon as possible.